Well, a new poll from Abacus Data has more bad news for the Trudeau Liberals. Take a look at the numbers. Nationally, Conservatives are still enjoying a double-digit lead over all other parties, claiming 43% of the committed vote share right now. Liberals come in at a distant second, down 1 percentage point, and then followed by the NDP, up 1 percentage point themselves. But take a look at what happens when you take Quebec out of the equation. Conservatives still have a commanding lead, but New Democrats come in second place, leading the Liberals by 3 points at 22%. Well, with more on the Abacus Data poll, we're now joined by the company's founder and CEO, David Coletto. David, thank you for making the time.
Good to see you, Michael.
Okay, so let's begin here with the NDP, because, you know, from a layman's perspective, this seems to be fairly huge. The party is now leading the Liberals countrywide when you factor out Quebec numbers. How devastating is that for the Trudeau Liberals?
Well, it's devastating in two ways, I think. One, in the sense that, well, now they're trailing the NDP, a party that, you know, is fourth place in the House of Commons and is, from all the other research we've done, you know, they share the biggest pool of voters who are open to voting for either of them. So they're their direct competitor in trying to attract that progressive voter. But it's devastating, I think, for a psychological reason, in that there are lots of Canadians who don't want Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to win the next election, probably a majority of the country. And so the fight over the next few months is trying to figure out who's the alternative for that. And if the New Democrats are seen increasingly by people to be that alternative, because the polls are signaling that, then you might see, you know, not a flood of people, but more of those Liberal voters right now moving to the NDP in belief that they will be best able to stop Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the Conservative numbers in a bit, but when you look at this, again, NDP result, when you take Quebec out, is this, do you think, a judgment on Trudeau's leadership or the party as a whole? And I ask that because I wonder if changing the Liberal leader would improve the party fortunes in any way.
Well, I think so much of just the decline in Liberal numbers is almost directly attributed to how people feel about the Prime Minister, right? As pollsters like me say, the correlation between how you view the Prime Minister and your likelihood to vote Liberal is almost perfect. If you don't like them, you're not voting Liberal, and if you like them, and there's not many left who do, most of them are going to vote Liberal. So I think in politics today, it's very hard for us to separate how we feel about the person who is the most prominent, is the leader of a party, and how we feel about that party. And so I think the NDP's gain is probably less to do with the New Democrats themselves, and probably some indication that ending the confidence and supply arrangement has allowed them maybe some space to be seen as a change agent, and the continued deterioration in the Prime Minister's personal numbers.
Okay, but you know, when you look at the NDP number, you know, while a lead, again, when you take Quebec out, it's not a breakaway number from the Liberals. So would that translate into more seats for the NDP or just guarantee a vote split?
Well, the bad news in this number for the New Democrats is, yeah, I don't think it generates many new seats. You know, they're still third in Ontario. They're second in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but they're so far behind the Conservatives in both of those provinces that it's unlikely to convert into any seats. And there's probably some good news in British Columbia, but again, it's hard for us to say, is that in part because there's a provincial election going on there, or is this really solid federal NDP support? I think this is if you're the New Democrats, you're probably saying this is the first step. It's probably not hopefully the last step if you're them, but it doesn't mean they're going to win, you know, dozens more seats. It just means, again, psychologically, maybe that's going to help consolidate some of that vote in places where the NDP is stronger than the Liberals, and the Prairies and BC right now are clearly two regions where that's the case.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Conservative lead right now. You know, it's been in double digits for well over a year now. How hard set is that support, would you say?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at that. I mean, when we ask voters who support the Conservatives today whether they're likely to change their mind, 6%, so a very small sliver of that 43 that they have right now, say they would likely change their mind. So that is not a lot of voters. And if they all moved over to another party, the Conservatives would still have, you know, over 40% of the vote. But another way to look at it is when we asked them in another survey we did, is your vote for the Conservatives more about liking Mr. Poilievre, liking the Conservative Party, liking their policies, Or is this more about not liking the Liberals, in particular Mr. Trudeau? And 4 out of 10 of those Conservatives say it's more about not liking the Liberals and Mr. Trudeau. And so that tells me that it's firm as long as those conditions remain. As long as the Prime Minister is the leader of the Liberal Party, as long as he is the head of the top of that ballot, I think it's going to be hard for any party to start chipping away at that Conservative lead. And so I think it's increasingly over time now. It's been a year since the Conservatives opened this kind of lead. It is firming up. And unless something fundamentally changes in the political landscape, those are voters who are looking for change, and they see the Conservatives as the best vehicle to achieve that.
Okay, and to that, there is one more number I want to discuss with you, because it was interesting to see that public support for an election right now, it's not a majority of Canadians that want it, but it is the leading number. I think about 32% is what I saw in your poll. How widespread is that sentiment, geographically, demographically, or is that support for an election happening now coming mainly from voters who identify as Conservative?
So it's mostly Conservatives, but it's also people who generally want a change in government. So if you're somebody out there watching this show who's like, I'll do anything to change this government, well, then to me, it's not surprising that they would be open to an election. And the flip side is true. About the third of Canadians who say, no, I don't want an election now, I'll wait till next October. Well, most of them aren't as anxious for change as the third that want that election as soon as possible. The rest of the country, about half say, well, maybe an earlier election will work, but maybe not before Christmas or the New Year. And then there's 1 out of 5 who say, I really don't care. So I think the language about saying Canadians don't want an election isn't true. I think there are many who do, and those are the folks who look at the current government and say, I want to change who's in charge. And if I have the chance to do it sooner rather than later, I'm going to relish in that opportunity.
Okay, very interesting results here, David. Thank you for joining us to talk about them.
Thanks, Michael.
That's David Coletto from Abacus Data.